let's do this.
Go, 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 go.
I'm alright. Logan, really? The intro has me as an obese man eating, and it says Whopper Jr. for life. You couldn't even upgrade me to a full Whopper. It had to be Whopper Jr.
Whopper Jr. See.
Whopper Jr. We mic'd up Logan today because we felt bad that we have silenced him. And we figure, you know, it's some kind of political statement because his shirt says keep calm and carry on, and it's got yes. So we're like, you know, always, you know what? Berkeley does it to Ann Coulter and Milo Yiannopoulos, blah, 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 blah. Why can't we do it to Logan Stewart? All right. So anyway, so today it's an important topic. We've talked about it before. I wanted to rehash it again because I think it's so important. I get a lot of messages about it. I get love, hate, and indifference. But what I want to do is try to bring us up to speed. And this includes muggles, non-medical folk, as well as medical folk. Bring us up to speed on what is the deal, this big controversy with carbs and fat, and how the hell do we eat to stay healthy, not have a heart attack, and not become fat AF. And the truth is, it's very complex, it's very individual. If anyone tells you they have a one-size-fits-all solution, they are trying to sell you something. They are Dr. Oz, Dr. Mercola, or some other doctor not otherwise specified that needs to be stopped. Am I right, Tom Heineber?
You are, as always, correct, Z.
And that's what I pay you no money for, to say those kind of things. So guys, what I want to start with is just the basic physiology of the nutrition we're going to talk about. Then we're going to talk about things like cholesterol, inflammation, and why our standard American diet, or SAD, is killing us. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm advocating everybody go on a low-carb, high-fat diet. I'm not saying everybody abandon whatever is working for them. I'm saying that here is a way of thinking about these nutrients, macronutrients, in a way that might enlighten you, allow you to talk to your patients better, allow you to deal with your own nutrition better, and at least give us some talking points to move forward in the discussion of nutrition. They don't teach us ish about nutrition in medical school. We get the short end of the stick on that, and we're expected to help our patients, but we don't even have the tools ourselves. So I'm going to try to start to chip away at that because it's been a passion of mine for a while. A lot of it comes from personal experience and from friends of mine that are sort of luminaries in the space of this newer way of thinking about fats, carbohydrates, weight loss, exercise, cancer, those kind of things. Sound good? Let's do it. So I want to start by saying when we're talking about carbohydrates, and the standard American diet for years, it's been pushed on us by government and by thought leaders and by public health people that saturated fats are bad, that low-fat diets are better, and that having a food pyramid that's based on grains and carbohydrates and fruits and those kind of things is healthy for us, and cutting out things like eggs that have dietary cholesterol, saturated fat, meat products, cheeses, those kind of things in moderation, that's been the teaching. What has happened in these years is we've gotten fatter as a people, we have skyrocketing rates of diabetes, heart disease, etc. Everything is, although actually heart disease rates are slowly starting to moderate, but what we're seeing is we're not solving the problem with this diet. So what's going on? Why are we still getting fat? One of the countervailing arguments that's emerged over the years is that we may have the paradigm a little bit wrong. It may be a multifactorial problem, one of which is a high carbohydrate diet in the setting of decreasing amounts of daily exercise. So let's start by saying, how are carbohydrates processed in the body? What different kinds are there? And what does this even mean, okay? Like, what do we do with carbohydrates? Why are they a big deal? This is how it works. Carbohydrates, sugars, wheat, fructose corn syrup, fruit, that all contains carbohydrates, different kinds. Some are very simple, they're absorbed very fast. We can call those fast carbs. Some of them are very complex, and they're like branched polymers and things like that, starches, etc. They're absorbed very slowly because we have to kind of digest them into smaller bits for them to cross the bloodstream and get into the blood, ultimately into the form of fructose or glucose, etc. Now, when we eat carbohydrates, they cross into the bloodstream, and if they're glucose, say, ultimately when they're broken down, they end up being processed like this. They go into the blood, they circulate. The blood does not like high levels of glucose because it causes problems in how electrolytes and water move across membranes. It's osmosis. So when you have too much glucose, like in diabetics, you end up with all kinds of problems. You spill it in the kidney, you have osmotic problems where water's moving the wrong way, your electrolytes get deranged, you end up sticking glucoses onto things they're not supposed to stick onto. That's called glycosylation. That's where hemoglobin A1C, by the way, one of the tests we use comes from. It's glycosylated hemoglobin, and you can measure that over time. So this is not good. So the body regulates glucose by way of insulin. And insulin is a hormone. It's a kind of a growth hormone. It's what they call an anabolic hormone. In other words, it causes growth, or it causes the glucose to actually enter cells. So if you imagine this, here's your little glucose guy. Insulin is a key. There are little keyholes or receptors on cells, muscle cells, liver cells, etc., fat cells. And when insulin is present, it opens the key and the door opens and that glucose can enter the cells. When it's in the blood, okay, the first parking spot that glucose wants to go to is liver and muscle glycogen. So think of it this way. The liver can store about 200 grams of glucose in the form of a polymer called glycogen. 200 grams of that. That means that if you have no glucose, you can burn that first and it keeps your brain going, because the brain primarily in carb-adapted people runs on glucose. So the first parking spot when you eat a high glucose meal is the liver. It goes, sits there. Now what if that's already full? For most of us it is, because every day in our Western diet we eat a ton of carbohydrates. We have 3 meals because we're told eat every single meal including breakfast, and we have snacks in between because otherwise we get hungry, right? And I'm going to get back to that in a second. So in the setting of this, our liver is already full of glucose, 200 grams there. Where's the next place glucose can go? The muscle. So in muscle cells, there's another form of glycogen, muscle glycogen, that is glucose stored in muscle. Again, insulin is the gateway that allows the glucose to get into the muscle cells and be stored there. 300 to 500 grams of glucose in muscle, depending on how ripped you are. For example, me, 1,000 grams, because I'm just yoked. Tom Heineber?
That is a gross over-exaggeration, Z.
Yeah, for the podcast people, neither one of us are yoked, just in case you're wondering. So 300 to 500 grams in the muscle. Now, again, in the muscle, it's nice because muscle uses glucose for fuel, as does brain, as does pretty much every cell. So in the setting of this, you have places to park glucose. Now, what happens when those places are full? All the parking spots are full, insulin's opened the door, but the glucose has nowhere to go. Then what does it do? So you've eaten a big old white bagel with jelly. So you have fructose from the jelly, you have a ton of glucose that's broken down from the wheat in the bagel. It enters the bloodstream quickly because it's white bread, and white bread is very simple carbohydrates that are absorbed fast. Boom, you get a spike in blood glucose. The liver's full, the muscle's full really fast. Now what happens? The liver still takes that glucose, but it turns it into triglycerides, aka fat. So triglycerides are then produced in the liver. Some of them stay in the liver, and over years, a high carbohydrate diet, an abusively high carbohydrate diet, can cause something called fatty liver, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, fatty liver. And we're seeing increasing cases of this, leading to severe things like cirrhosis and the need for liver transplants. Now, when the triglycerides enter the blood, where do they park? Do you know, Tom? Where does fat park in the body?
I'm in the fat?
That's exactly right. The muggle can be taught. So it's exactly right. So triglycerides are stored in the form of in adipose cells. The adipose cells swell, and you have stored your sugar. So this old idea that eating fat makes you fat, it's actually backwards. Eating carbohydrates in excess creates fat. So when you eat that Big Mac, you have protein, you have fat, you have a ton of carbohydrates because you're eating it with fries. You're sipping it down with a drink that's usually sugary. And the bread in that is full of carbs. So you overwhelm the liver's ability to store glucose, the muscle's ability to store glucose, and now you flood your blood with fat. That then is stored as fat. Now, what happens when all that happens? Insulin is the mechanism. So your pancreas, even by thinking about the Big Mac, by thinking about the Whopper, you start to secrete insulin. That's a psychogenic insulin secretion. By the way, mind-body connection, again, represent. When this happens, like that's why, and by the way, this is an interesting point, appetizers are associated with higher weight gain. Why is this? Because appetizers stimulate insulin early. And let me finish the loop on where the glucose goes. When you stimulate insulin, whether it's psychogenically or with food, insulin levels rise, glucose levels fall because they're being turned into triglycerides in the liver, they're going into liver and muscle, right? They're being stored as fat. Suddenly glucose levels drop. So you get this quick rise because you have simple sugars absorbed really fast, then the insulin, and then bam. What happens to your hunger levels? Through the roof, because insulin stimulates hunger by dropping your blood sugar levels. Now what happens? You overeat at the meal. So the studies show that eating appetizers actually increases your overall meal caloric intake, and you get hunger.
Anecdotally, I have the opposite reaction to that actually. Like, I will order chicken wings immediately so that I just get some food, and then I don't make a bad decision because I'm too hungry.
So now let's be real careful about what you just ordered. You ordered chicken wings. Chicken wings have minimal carbohydrate, a lot of fat, and a lot of protein. They don't trigger as much insulin secretion. There's definitely some, especially depending on what the sauce is. And so you're full. Your satiety centers are triggering, going, I'm full. But your insulin is not firing yet. So that's a really interesting twist on that. Now, appetizers typically are things with carbs, little fried things, chips, guacamole with chips, and that's what kind of triggers insulin. So now you have an insulin spike, you get hungry, your blood sugar drops and now you're hungry. And that cycle then causes you to overeat the next time. Now let's extrapolate this for a second. If we're in a Western diet where it's high carb, and I'm not saying other diets don't have a lot of carbs, they're just more balanced a lot of the times. There's higher fat, good fats, etc. And if you're in a Western diet where you're focused on carbs, you're hungry in between meals a lot, which means you're snacking, which means you're eating more calories, which means you're getting more insulin, and the snacks are usually high carb, and then you're hungry again. And this cycle of glucose spikes, insulin release, drop, hunger, fat storage of the glucose is what I would say in many people is killing us. And it's been seen in South Asian populations mercilessly. They're very sensitive to this, but in the standard American population across the board, we see it all the time. Now, I want to clarify because I always get this criticism. You're telling everyone a one-size-fits-all thing. No, I'm not. Some people handle carbohydrates really well without getting hungry, and they do really well on a low-fat, generally low-calorie, normal carb diet. They have no problems with it. But many people don't. Dean Ornish has focused on this type of diet. People like Michael Katz at Princeton have focused on this type of diet. There's nothing wrong with it if it works for you. But if it doesn't, you really need to look at the carbohydrates. And for many South Asians like myself, this diet doesn't work at all.
I think you're spot on for a lot of the American population though, because look, there's 3 of us in this room and we're all fairly carb intolerant.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there was a time in my life, most of my 20s, when I listened to the government. What did you just put up? Let me see that again. Carbs are awesome, shut your mouth, says Logan. Yeah, fist in the air. Okay, screw you and your carbs, Logan. I'm gonna tell you why you're wrong, but also why you're awesome.
Giant smoothie before coming here, by the way.
Oh, brilliant! Was it one of those unicorn smoothies from Starbucks, or was it
Smoothie King?
Smoothie King. And by the way, we should talk about Smoothie King because when you grind up your fruit, you release fructose and the sugars from their fibrous matrix, causing fast absorption, which causes insulin spikes, more hunger, and all the things I'm talking about, including fat absorption. Eat your calories, don't drink them.
Can I also say quickly, before we get back on topic, I worked at Tropical Smoothie. There's a full cup of sugar in every smoothie. Added sugar.
It's delicious.
Yeah, and you know, in the old days, they would have done that as an advertising thing. We replace your fat with sugar, see? Because sugar is healthy and wholesome. It's pure cane sugar, see? It's just like the people who told you to smoke yourself thin. It will work because you will die of lung cancer. So here's the basic idea. When then we're carb adapted, which many of us in the West are. Now, we're carb adapted, meaning we're used to processing carbs in this way. We get these blood sugar spikes. Today, we were working on some Vader footage, and Logan said, I gotta go eat something right now. It was noon. And that's because he's carb adapted, his sugar had crashed, and he was hungry, and he had to eat. And that's why they say eat 3 square meals and snacks, little snacks in between, small, frequent meals. And that may work for some people, and people with diabetes, that may be the right answer. But for someone like me, if I do that, I gain a ton of weight. All through my 20s, I was overweight. When I was young, I was overweight. And what finally switched it for me is I realized my carb-heavy standard American diet was killing me. It wasn't good for my genetics. What worked for me was adapting to a lower carb, not zero carb, not something like ketosis, which I did play with. I didn't like it long term. I don't think it was sustainable long term for me. For some athletes and stuff, it works well. That means very low carbs, right? But for me, cutting out some of the major sources of refined carbohydrates, focusing on good fats and proteins, and skipping breakfast for me, because when I wasn't carb adapted, I wasn't hungry for breakfast, I was barely hungry for lunch, and for dinner I was okay, and I ate a normal meal with not too many excess carbs. Now, a lot of people will argue this, and I hear this all the time, but our ancestors ate wheat and bread, and in the Bible it says breaking bread and turning this into that into bread. And this is all true. And Indians, historically, South Asians, have eaten a high carb, rice-based, Chinese do the same thing, rice-based diet. What's the difference, Tom, can you guess, between our culture now and our carb diet and what they were doing? Why were they thin and not having diabetes and these high cancer rates and other things that we're seeing?
They were active.
They were active. Logan got it. I feel like I'm back in the hospital, but with people that aren't doctors, and they're just as smart as doctors. So they weren't active, and this is why that matters. Remember, we talked about parking spaces for glucose. If you exercise, even as simple as getting up from the computer and marching around a little bit, pacing around, you open up those parking spots in your muscle glycogen by burning that glycogen and in your liver. So if you go exercise for 30 minutes aggressively aerobic and you do those things, like you're constantly walking, right? You will open up enough spots that you can then tolerate a high carb diet without overloading it and turning it into fat. Now, remember, in India and in other places, in the old days, people would squat, they would eat like this. Their core strength was tremendous. Their leg strength was tremendous. Legs are the biggest muscles in the body. The bigger your muscle mass, the more parking spots you have for glucose. For so many years, we've talked about not doing weights and resistance training and focusing instead on aerobic training. Well, this is a huge disservice because you're not building the muscle that allows a sink, a parking spot for glucose. And so now when you eat your high carb diet, it's all going into fat. Now, the second piece about this is in the setting of lack of parking spaces, and remember, a little bit of exercise goes a long way with that, and resistance training goes a long way, core strength training goes a long way, increasing your capacity, your insulin sensitivity. How much, if you have a little insulin, you store out glucose easily and quickly, right? But in our current culture, this isn't there. So what happens? It gets stored as fat, and more preferentially, particularly in Asian populations, it gets stored as visceral or belly fat. Belly fat, every study seems to suggest, has properties beyond just being fat. It promotes more resistance to insulin. So as these cells swell and get inflammatory and active, they become less sensitive to the effects of insulin. So it's harder and harder and harder to store glucose, to park glucose. And this becomes a vicious cycle. So fatter people have more trouble storing glucose and they get fatter and they're hungrier. And it's a loop. And then we see people just in despair because they can't break the cycle. Right? But there's a way to break it, and that is, for many people, it might be taking a look at what you're eating in terms of carbs, right? So that's one piece of it. Tom, did you have any thoughts so far?
Well, did you ever, you weren't very active in sports, but did you ever have to carb load before an event or anything like that?
Yeah, I used to do some track and field, and they would tell you to carb load, eat like a big old thing of pasta. And I'll tell you what happened to me. I would hit the wall. Like somewhere into my exercise, I would hit this, bam, I am so hungry, I'm gonna die, and I'm out of energy. And athletes will call that sometimes the wall. And what it can be is that you've eaten all the sugar basically in the form of simple pasta. Your insulin goes up, you exercise, you burn it all down, and then you crash. And you have nothing, and you're not fat adapted. You're not adapted to burn fat yet by producing ketones, so you have nothing. So you just crash. You gotta eat right away.
I think most people intuitively get this, or at least if there are people that suffer with it like we do, carb intolerance. But how do you make healthy choices in our fast-paced lifestyle? How do you make easy, healthy choices?
Right. So if we're gonna say that too many carbohydrates in the Western diet are bad, and I'm not making an assertion on low fat, high fat, and we can talk about fats another time. The fact that saturated fats causing heart disease is a myth in the absence of excess carbohydrates, and we can talk about that another time. The fact that excess carbohydrates can lead to an insulin-resistant state where insulin promotes other types of inflammation that are bad in terms of heart vessel, so cardiogenic, triglycerides circulating, cardiogenic problems like atherosclerosis, heart disease, etc. Cancers in the form of inflammatory things and the growth promotion of insulin itself. So high insulin levels are bad. And then of course things like diabetes, high blood pressure, which is promoted by insulin and high carb diets as well. So what people find when they go on a very low carb diet is often their blood pressure drops, so much so that they get dizzy and sort of orthostatic. In the short term, they're very lightheaded, and they have to drink a lot of fluids and eat salt to keep their blood pressure up, because it's that profound of a peeing effect, a diuretic effect, to get that insulin out of your system to lower your insulin level. So Tom's question of how do we eat in our current world, here's a simple way to think about it. There's just a few simple premises, and I'm not telling anyone to do anything radical. And what I did works for me, which I don't eat breakfast. I have a very small lunch that's mostly nuts and things with high fiber, an avocado. I don't eat any carbs at lunch because then I might get hungry. And then dinner, I have a rational dinner: brown rice. Tonight I had a chicken with an avocado, some brown rice, and some baked kale, and that was perfect. And right now, and I followed up with berries. So raspberries, blueberries, blackberries with some almonds sprinkled on top. And I'll tell you why I do this. So the fasting during the day means that I'm literally, when I go to bed till the time I have lunch, I haven't eaten anything. So that could be 16, 18 hours, right? In that time, my body starts to burn fat and produce ketones. And I'm able to function on that in a way that I don't get hungry, and I have energy, and I'm not getting these mood swings and all of that, and I feel focused. Then I can have a little bit of stuff for lunch, like some nuts, which are high in fat. I tend to like macadamia nuts, some dark chocolate, because it tastes good, it has minimal sugar, and it has antioxidant effects, right? That have been shown in vasodilatory effects. Then by dinner time, I'm not starving, and I have a good amount of protein, the chicken skin, the avocado is good fat, and the vegetables. As many vegetables as you can eat, and undercook them. Because in many Indian cultures, they stew these vegetables, they lose all their nutrients, and their whatever sugars are in them are released much more quickly, and you kind of negate the effect. So complex carbohydrates, vegetables, and then I end it with a fruit, which is berries, that are very low in rapidly absorbed sugars. So if you eat a mango, it's just sweet, it's full of fructose, it's like eating a sugar bomb. If you eat a bowl of berries with some nuts that have fiber and fat and slows the absorption of the sugar, you're full. You have a great crap the next day because it's full of fiber, and it's full of antioxidants, and it doesn't trigger a butt ton of insulin secretion. So you get the sweet fix, you get fiber, and you get antioxidants to kind of counteract any inflammatory stuff that you're eating. So it's not that hard. The other thing is, like someone like Logan, who loves to drink calories. So in other words, colas, frappuccinos, smoothies. I would just say, Logan, just drink water and maybe eat a handful of nuts and stuff, and slowly start to adapt yourself to it. Your sweet tooth will go away, your cravings for those things will go away, but it'll take 3 weeks to do that, to adapt for many people. So that's one thought of how we could eat better.
Joel says, show us your before and after, Z. If you guys want to go to Mrs. Dog's Facebook page, there's some pictures from when Z was fat.
Yeah, go to Mrs. Dog MD. She has a Facebook page now. She posted a picture from 1997. Where me and Dr. Harry met Cokie Roberts at a thing in Fresno, California. We were doing an away rotation. That's where we became buddies. And you can see in that picture, all right, first of all, I have hair, which is creepy and wrong on every level. And second of all, if you look laterally, what you'll see is a muffin top, a legitimate muffin top, like this. Now, in those days, what I was doing is I was doing exactly what they told me. I would have bagels, and I was so low fat. I was paranoid about fat because I have some heart disease in the family. I would never eat fat, and I would only eat what they were promoting at the time, which are vegetable oils, polyunsaturated fats, margarine if I was going to have a fat. Now, what has happened since then? I changed my diet entirely. I avoid refined carbohydrates, but I don't avoid carbohydrates like the plague. On the weekend, I cheat a little, and I may have a little dessert with my kids. So I live a normal life, but I do skip breakfast. I do have a very tiny lunch. I'm not hungry all day, and I eat a rational dinner most days. We go out to eat. We'll have sushi with rice. We'll have those things. But then the next day, maybe I will skip breakfast, and I might even skip lunch. I may just have a couple of nuts, and I'm good. And it's almost like getting back into a kind of a mini fasting state, and then I have my normal dinner. Now, over the years, this thinking on polyunsaturated fats has evolved. So these vegetable oils actually could be very harmful because they're high in omega-6 inflammatory fatty acids that are not healthy. You want a higher ratio of omega-3 found in fish, found in expeller pressed, the way you process these oils like canola oil. And so even the type of vegetable oil matters. We think, and again, the data is still preliminary on this, so this is not a hard and fast thing. I'm just giving you information and some guidelines to think about and to research on your own. But in the setting of that, we know avocados, monounsaturated fats like olive oil, very, very, very healthy, anti-inflammatory, heart healthy, and they fill you up, they make you full. If you can start to transition your diet to that. And so I see a lot of people who they're drinking their calories in the form of sugar, they're drinking smoothies and juicing. Very, 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 for many people that can be very bad. It's just going to trigger hunger and insulin, and for all the reasons that we talked about.
You know, I have a real problem with the low carb thing I'm doing it right now, but I have a problem with it from the standpoint of like, I just miss things like a burger and fries. I miss things that have emotional resonance for me, and there's no foods like that. And I get really sick of just eating meat and vegetables.
So this is the thing, I don't think you should just eat meat and vegetables, and I don't think you should go to an extreme. I think extremes of any kind never are sustainable. So what I would say is maybe, Tom, for you, because I know your style too, maybe the skipping breakfast, having a very tiny lunch, and then having a dinner that's just rational. Maybe there is a hamburger with fries every now and again. But that period of fasting in between actually allows you more stability. And it depends on you. Maybe for you, you need to eat more smaller meals more frequently. So everybody's different. There's no one size fits all. Now, Dean Ornish isn't wrong. A low fat, high vegetable, vegetarian diet may work wonders for some people. It's better for the environment. It's better ethically. All those things are true. I'm not arguing that. I'm saying for many people, it's not sustainable. And what may be sustainable is saying, you know what, instead of white bread, I'm gonna have brown bread. Instead of white rice, I'm gonna have brown rice. I'm gonna get used to it. I'm gonna put olive oil on the brown rice when I cook it, so it adds a heavier component that tastes kind of interesting and good, fills you up faster, and slows the absorption of the carbs. I'm gonna think about maybe not having 3 meals a day and snacking in between unless it's something very low glycemic, like nuts or something like that. And remember, not all nuts are created equal. Cashews are very high in carbohydrates. Whereas macadamia nuts are quite low, pecans are lower, walnuts are lower. So choose your nuts wisely too.
Emily says breakfast is the most important meal of the day was just a marketing tactic. It's actually very possible to go without breakfast. I didn't know that bacon was added to the American diet because the Pork Bellies Future Association wanted to sell more pork belly futures.
And God bless the Pork Belly Futures Association, because without bacon, where would we be? We'd be Jewish or Muslim. Which would be just fine.
And bacon's delicious, though.
Bacon is delicious. No, but so the idea that the diet industrial complex is tweaking our diet, I think there's some relevance to that. I'm not a big conspiracy fan, as you know, but I will say there is money in breakfast. And General Mills has known this forever. And I'll tell you, breakfast cereals are the least healthy thing. Here's the best part. You'll see someone who's just a South Asian guy who's had a heart attack, and his cardiac diet is oatmeal with brown sugar, with orange juice, and a bunch of fruit. And you're like, wait a minute now. Okay, what you're doing is you're basically eating a sugar bomb. You're secreting insulin that's gonna cause, hypertrophy of your endovascular wall. You're gonna cause all the other problems. Your triglycerides are gonna go up. You're gonna have an insulin-resistant state. All the things that we're saying are contributing to this. And when you measure your cholesterol, triglycerides matter. They're a real good indication of insulin resistance and how many carbs you're eating. So next time you get a cholesterol panel, don't look at the total cholesterol. It's bullshit. Look at the whole panel. What's your LDL doing, your HDL, and your triglycerides? And here's the interesting thing. Do you know what causes HDL to go down? There are many things. HDLs are, quote, good cholesterol. One of the big things is carbohydrates. A high carbohydrate diet will lower your LDL, your HDL. It can also lower your LDL, your bad cholesterol, but the particle size. So it's not just the number, it's how big they are. The smaller the particle, the more likely they are to get jammed in your arterial wall and cause inflammation and atherosclerosis and heart attack. So there's so much nuance to it that has not been sort of fleshed out. And the idea that this one-size-fits-all, everybody should eat breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And I guarantee you, Tom, there are comments right now, I'm not looking at the comments, that are saying, how dare you attack breakfast? You are poisoning people with your lies. Guaranteed.
People love bacon.
People do love bacon, and they are God's people.
Joe wants to know how you feel about plant-based diets.
So my take on plant-based diet is if you can do it, it is ethical, it's better for the environment, and it's better for your health, with one exception. Many Indian men in particular, and women as well, die on a vegetarian diet. They die like dogs in their 30s and their 40s of heart disease on a perfectly vegetarian diet without saturated fat. They're not adding ghee and all this other stuff, and they die. Why? because they are exactly the type of people that are not tolerating the high carbohydrate load in many vegetarian diets. So what will happen is you have to put in legumes like lentils and dal. You have to put in a lot of rice. You often have to use products that aren't as high in protein and fat, and as a result, you're substituting carbs. So what ends up happening, these guys, and they don't look fat, they look skinny. And the term, it's not a medical term, the term is skinny fat. So skinny fat means, hey, look at, Bhupinder, he's totally skinny. What's going on? If you were to actually DEXA scan his belly, you would see it's riddled with internal fat around the visceral organs. That's the inflammatory, deadly fat that leads to insulin resistance, inflammation, heart attack, metabolic syndrome, diabetes. And that's why a vegetarian diet isn't a one-size-fits-all. You have to find the right diet, you have to have the right genetics, etc. So I think, yes, eat plants, mostly plants, not too much, and enjoy it. That's,
Ellen's correcting you here. She says plant-based diets are not better for the environment. Where are you getting your info? She has a little bit of a point because, in order to harvest a large number of plants, you have to run a thresher over the crops, and that kills small animals. So there really is no ethical way to eat, people.
No, that's crap. Raising a cow takes so much fossil fuel, feed, water.
It's the meth. It
produces
gas.
methane.
It's the methane.
It produces methane,
That's the
which
big
is a
problem.
greenhouse gas. So it is environmentally superior to be an agrarian society. I'm not saying we should do that. Ethically, all right, if you've seen factory farms, it is a freaking horror show. These are conscious animals. They're conscious. They have awareness. You are making them suffer. Therefore, you are doing evil in the world. That's just a fact. You can ethically raise animals for slaughter and to eat them. I believe that. That's why I am not a vegetarian. Otherwise, I would feel compelled ethically to do that. But I try to make sure I get food that is ethically raised. I don't always succeed. Also, I love that bacon, though, people. Okay, I will eat Wilbur.
How do you reconcile that, though? That we're going to start advocating low carb diets for people, et cetera, but then you're also going to have to increase factory farming to feed everybody.
Well, so I want to clarify. I'm not advocating anything. I'm saying, guys, and low carb is a misnomer. I want to eat a normal carb diet for the level of exercise you do. What we have now is too many carbs for the level of exercise in our genetics for many of us. I want to normalize that. That doesn't necessarily mean low. It just means correct. Now, as far as how do you raise food to promote a lower carb diet, nuts, vegetables, certain types of dairy, which aren't as easy to raise, and some meat, fish, etc. Now, none of this is easy, but we can find ethical and sustainable ways to do it. You could do it in a vegetarian way. You absolutely could. Olive oil is a vegetable product. So an olive oil-based vegetarian diet like Dean Ornish may advocate is actually a wonderful way to do that. It's just, if for many people they find it hard and unpalatable, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And if it works for you, by all means, do it. A little bit of alcohol if you already drink, it's a good thing. Nuts, exercise, social connections, reduction in stress, meditation, all those things go into this anti-inflammatory balanced life that will allow you to live like they do in the blue zones where people live to 110.
Matt wants a few seconds of your thoughts on MCT oil.
Sorry, on MCT oil.
MCT oil, medium chain triglyceride
Yeah,
oil.
so medium chain triglyceride is a type of triglyceride that's pretty quickly absorbed and it's very quickly utilized in bloodstream. And so many performance people, the bulletproof coffee guy, they like to put it in their coffee. My friend Peter Attia, who's a researcher in this space, likes medium chain triglyceride for performance and stuff. So it's another way to get energy from fat. It could be expensive. It's not entirely dietary. You have to kind of get it. And so my feeling is if you're trying to perform as an athlete, you can experiment with this stuff. If you're just trying to live your life, I'm not sure it's a huge benefit. For biohackers who want to try to optimize their life and their performance and their mental state, by all means give it a shot. My feeling is you need something that's sustainable, that's natural in the sense that you eat it. It's socially acceptable, so in other words, I can do it with my family and my kids without ruining their lives. Because my kids are in a state where they can eat what they want, they can have high carbs, and they do just fine. The standard American diet doesn't hurt them. We never let them drink sugary drinks. We don't let them eat a lot of candy and dessert, so we try to balance it, but they're in a better state than I am. My genetics just aren't that good. Now, my wife's is somewhere in between. My wife, who you guys have met on the show, she is a classic example of someone, she's Chinese, so Asian, had gestational diabetes. She's rail thin, weighs like 105 pounds, right, when she was initially pregnant. And that she still had gestational diabetes when she was pregnant, says that there's an insulin resistance tendency in her genes. Her dad, who weighs like 90 pounds, has this. And so she is going to have to watch her carbohydrates, how she eats. When she was pregnant, she was eating just complex carbs, more fat, etc., and it worked out fine. She controlled her sugar without insulin. So you have to know who you are, what your genetics are, what your culture is going to be, what's socially acceptable, what's going to keep you connected. Going on a ketogenic low carb diet where you're not eating any carbs is going to ostracize you pretty fast unless you're hanging out with other people who are doing the same thing.
I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. What do you think your family's dinner tonight cost? 'Cause Susan here in the comments is saying it's too expensive to eat healthy. So
Yeah.
what do you think for a family of 4 you spent on tonight's dinner?
I can tell you right now. So we went to Albertsons, which is our local cheapo grocery store. We got an organic open range chicken because I don't like to torture animals. That's number one. But the second reason, it's not because I'm a pinko commie liberal, it's because the open range chickens eat a more natural, wide-ranging diet, and so the ratio in their fat of these omega-3s and omega-6s and linoleic acid and those kind of things is more, technically could be more anti-inflammatory. That's one of the theories. So I like that. I like the fact that I'm not torturing them. That chicken cost $9 for a 4-pound bird, all right? So it's a $9 chicken. You can get 2 chickens for $9 if they're factory raised. So yes, it's more expensive. Now I had the kale, which cost something like $2 or $3 for like the 2 bunches that we baked, and broccoli that came in a bag that wasn't organic, and that cost whatever $2, $3 it was. So add it all up, you're looking at less than $20 for feeding. Oh, and the avocado. So the avocado was $3 for 2, and we ate both.
Why kale and not spinach?
We like the taste of kale. Spinach is actually just as nutrient rich, right?
It's more nutrient rich.
According to Tom Heinever. I haven't looked at this, but
Look it up, fools.
It just feels
Kale's
right.
just trendy.
Kale is trendy. Kale is for people like me that go to Whole Foods. I actually don't go to Whole Foods anymore. So because I found Albertsons has everything I need because they've increased their amount of organic stuff.
How do you eat well if you don't have time to make dinner?
Ooh. So how do you eat when your time is limited? When you're on that kind of situation? Okay. So there's ways to do this. The simplest thing is if you're going to get like fast food or you're going to grab something from a restaurant, just look at it and go, okay, I'm going to ditch the bready stuff and I'm going to try to go for like the chicken, maybe the stuff that's not deep fried, and maybe get a side of something that's not starch. So not the chips and all that. Maybe something like, and it's tricky because at places like McDonald's it is hard. But you can get their chicken sandwich and maybe only eat one of the bread pieces and then get something else on the side. The other thing is you can just learn. You can learn to cook very quickly, very cheaply, and very sort of moderate carby without a lot of drama. But Logan, honestly, I'd be lying to you if I said it wasn't a huge challenge, that it wasn't a challenge to eat economically. That's why I think people in our poorest parts of the country, in the inner cities, et cetera, they are very obese. They struggle with lots of chronic disease because they are in food deserts where stuff is really cheap. That isn't good.
For me, one of the key items that got me to cook in my kitchen was the crock pot. Because I can put something on in the morning, I come home later that night, it's done. Dinner's already there.
That's an easy and quick way, and I love that. Pressure cookers, crock pots, you just throw it all in. It's a simple recipe. And the great thing, Tom, is that you can get cuts of meat that are lower cost, that typically are tougher, that maybe don't have as much cachet, because in a crock pot, they all get turned into a sort of a very soft, tender thing. So that's one way to kind of get your bang for the buck when you're trying to do that.
Benjamin wants to know, how do you think Z-Dog feels about raising and killing your own chickens? I wonder if he could do it.
Could you do it?
I did it. I did it in college. So we actually had chickens, and the SPCA came and tried to take them away, and we're like, no. And our neighbors were Chinese. They were from Hong Kong, and they said, give us the chickens. And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, we'll take care of them and we'll all have dinner. And what was interesting was we realized that the pound was going to take these chickens and they were going to die. So we said, you know what, how do you kill the chickens? And they said, we do this and this, it's very painless, it's very quick, and they've had a very good life. And so we had this whole sort of ceremony where we said goodbye to the chickens, and that night they came over with a freaking chicken, and we ate the chickens. And a couple of us freaked out. I was actually kind of like, I'm honoring this chicken by eating this chicken and enjoying this chicken. But it was interesting. And I grew up in a rural part of California where we had, goats and chickens and all that stuff. And so it's just part of the culture, I think, of what you do. I don't know. I'll kill a chicken right now, Tom Heineber. I'll sacrifice it to the gods of health 3.0. I don't give an F.
A lot of people would like you to go a little more in depth on the ketogenic diet and just really what are your full thoughts on that matter?
Okay, so I'll give you a quick thing on ketogenesis, and I'm not going to dwell on it too much because I'm not necessarily advocating this. I did it for 8 months. I lost a ton of weight. I was as muscular and lean as an adult as I have ever been in my life, and I was 42 when I did this. And I wasn't exercising a lot. I was just going on a ketogenic diet, and it works like this. When you cut your carbs to a level that you are secreting almost no insulin, just basal levels of insulin, and that means less than 50 or 20 grams of carbs a day. And if you look at nutritional labels, you'll realize how hard that is to do. You are cutting out most carbs, and you are replacing it, not with protein, because high levels of protein actually can get converted in the liver through gluconeogenesis into glucose, which will then raise your insulin. That's sometimes why you can eat a whole big steak and suddenly have a really sweet tooth craving. Like you're just dying for something sweet. And the reason is you've turned all this protein into glucose, but you've raised your insulin and you're crashing and you need some sugar. So you replace it instead with fat, tons of fat. So maybe 80% of your calories come from fat. And how do you do that? You take a salad, you pour olive oil on it, you eat cheese, you eat the fat off the steak, you're eating chicken skin. You know, it's seriously high fat, and a lot of that fat is saturated fat. What ends up happening when you do that? Insulin levels stay very low, and over a period of usually 24, 46, 72 hours, you start to produce ketones. That means your body's like, shit, there's no glucose. Time to take fat, both from the diet and from the body, and burn it in the form of ketones, alpha hydroxy butyrate, beta hydroxybutyrate, I forget the exact ketone bodies. And as a result, those are burned in the cells and turned into ATP, and you use them for energy. The brain can actually burn ketones when it's adapted. 2/3 of it can function on ketones, then you only need 1/3 glucose. So this idea that the brain exclusively relies on glucose is incorrect. So in ketogenesis, when you're producing high levels of ketones, you're keto adapted. That means you're burning fat for fuel, which means when you don't eat, you are literally dipping into fat. And I'll tell you what happened to me. I started getting a six-pack. Like, I noticed that I had this weird click when I swallowed that I'd never noticed. And what it turned out being is I'd lost all the subcutaneous and fat around my trachea, and the little ligaments and stuff were clicking against each other. So you're burning fat all over, but I was eating a lot. I was full all the time, high fat diet. And so that's a way to the extreme of this, right? Where now I'm functioning as a fat adapted, like primitive caveman who's not eating any carbs. I would eat a few berries for dinner and it wouldn't throw me out of ketogenesis. But that is very difficult to sustain. It has some purported health benefits, like people with seizures, depending on the seizure type, can do better. Some people find they have more energy, more mental focus. I didn't see that effect, but I found that I could exercise for hours without ever crashing out. But to me, what I found is my lipid panel, my HDL went up, my good cholesterol went up, my triglycerides went down to like nothing, like 40. They were really low. Right? So that's all good from a metabolic standpoint, from a diabetes standpoint. But what went bad was my LDL went up a lot, my bad cholesterol. Now, the argument is these are big particles, so it's okay. I actually had them tested using NMR technology through HDL Labs. It's a very proprietary thing that my buddy does because he's a researcher in the space. And I found out that no, I was actually producing a ton of tiny lipid particles. So it turns out maybe I have the type of genetics that doesn't really love high amounts of animal saturated fat in the absence of balance. And you know how I knew that? I changed the diet very simply. I came out of ketogenesis, but I replaced that saturated fat with monounsaturated fat. So, nuts, olive oil, and avocado. And I still avoided a lot of carbs, and a lot of times I was still producing ketones, judging by the urine dip that I was doing. I was actually doing blood ketone testing at that time because I was extreme. And I found I was still often in ketogenesis, but my LDL cut in half, and my HDL stayed high. So for me, the magic diet for my genetics is the Mediterranean diet. High in good fats, lots of vegetables, a little bit of fruit, because fruit has a lot of sugar, so I eat berries, and carbohydrates in a balanced way. So that's how I settled out. So that's my ketogenesis tale. And again, I'm not a freaking nutrition scientist. I'm not an RD. I'm just a lowly hospitalist who's been through some of this and cares about people figuring out what's right for them.
Ellen wants to know in the comments, why are we so focused on weight loss? Globally.
In many ways, weight gain is a symptom of an underlying problem, not necessarily the problem in itself. So visceral fat gain, insulin resistance, inflammatory stuff, diabetes, that's heart disease, hypertension, cancer. Those are the problems with obesity. The weight itself, the aesthetics of it, I don't care about that. I'm married and old enough kids. I don't care how I look anymore. What I care about is not dying so that I can see my kids' graduation and their wedding. So as a result, that's why we care about weight. We care about preventing diabetes. We care about these things. We care about our joints because heaviness can cause real stress on the joints and then problems from that.
Well, also, don't you just feel better when you eat well?
So I do. I've never felt this good in my life. Now remember, go back to Mrs. Dog's page and look at my muffin top. And at that time, okay, I was lifting a ton of weights. I was doing all these other things, exercising every single day for like an hour a day. Still fat, still had no energy, okay, and still didn't feel great. Now, I exercise every day in some way. So I may just do a little bit of weights. I may do a little bit of walking on a Stairmaster. I may do a little bit of running on a treadmill, not much. Or swimming in the summer. And I just eat this diet. I have enough energy that you guys are always wondering how I have so much energy, even though I don't sleep that much, which by the way, sleep is so important because it's going to put everything in a framework where you're able to tolerate. People who are sleep deprived eat more. They have less regulated satiety. So there's lots of reasons to sleep. So don't do what I do. I'm doing it out of necessity right now, but I'm hoping to wean that off and get these two to do all my work for me so that I never have to lose sleep again. What do you think, Logan? You in?
I got a clip for us.
Oh, so Logan loves his carbs. He loves his drinks. Let's roll this clip.
Take a drink.
Still tastes the same.
What does it taste like?
It tastes like dog shit.
That, my friends, is exactly what drinking your carbs will do to you. That kid was spot on, man. Although, language, little lad. That's like the Z-pups when they hear me talking at night. They're like, "Oh, Daddy, I dropped an S-bomb at school today." It's like, you can't do that. Nope, only Daddy can do that, and even he's not supposed to, and Mrs. Dog is very upset.
By the way, every one of my friends who went and got one of those unicorn frappuccinos thing had instant sugar regret. Every single one of them.
You know, it's interesting. So sugar, okay, quick aside, and then maybe I'll look at a couple comments real quick, and then we'll wrap it up. When you're fat adapted and you've detoxed, and I hate that word detox because it makes me think of Gwyneth Paltrow and her jade vagina detox. When you're off the carbohydrates and you're fat burning adapted.
Well, can you go back real quick?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that transitional state, getting off the carbs? Because man, that is hard.
Okay.
AF.
Yeah, Tom's absolutely right.
And that's a real thing. Like that carb flu or whatever it is. It's real. Like, using the word flu is the wrong word, but you know
but
what I'm
they're
saying?
flu-like symptoms.
Yeah.
So people who go from a high-carb Western SAD diet, standard American diet, to a low-carb balanced, even if it's Mediterranean, they go through a kind of a withdrawal process. Headaches, dizziness, inability to sleep, because literally your body's like, oh my God, my substance is gone. It's an addiction, guys. Like sugar is an addiction, carbs are an addiction. And when you detox, that period you're very much in flux, your lipids are crazy, your mood is weird, and your immune system can often be a little bit off. And some people, like Tom, tends to get sick when he does that. So the key thing is don't swing too much back and forth. And a good example is the other night, what did I have? I went to a restaurant with my family. We had our usual thing, and I cheated. And I'm like, you know what? I don't usually have dessert like this. I'm going to eat that ice cream right there. Oh my gosh. And I used to eat ice cream all the time when I was carb adapted and muffin topped. And I had a headache. I felt ill. I couldn't function. I had weird, vivid dreams that night that weren't good. And so literally once you're adapted, you realize, man, maybe that was kind of toxic for me. Maybe that wasn't a good thing to be adapted to, right? It's like being hooked on Coke or alcohol. Like you forget that it's a toxin because you're so acclimatized to it.
when I went hiking with my wife, I ate an ice cream cone that was this big, and then I did Angel's Landing, which is a 5-mile really strenuous hike, and it was fine. But then the next day, I didn't do any hike, and my body was like, "Give me sugar," and I was like, "Yes, sir." So
Yeah.
that was where the problem
Because you're,
came in.
you're gonna want that. Actually, when we went to Grand Canyon, the same thing. I was eating pizza and wings and kind of just off the rails. I gained maybe 5 pounds. By the way, one of the things is the initial weight loss when you go on a low carb diet is often fluid loss because of the diuretic effect of not having so much insulin around. So don't be fooled, that's water loss. And the same thing happens when you break that diet and you start eating carbs, you'll gain like 5 pounds instantly. And some of that is glycogen being stored again, and that's often hydrated and it weighs a lot, and then some of it's water gain.
Hey,
so,
Z, real quick, Michael has a question about exogenous ketones. Do you take these?
So I actually met a group that's making exogenous ketones. They taste like jet fuel. They come in a little thing. You can drink them for performance to go into a sort of ketone burning state very quickly. It's still early. Nobody really knows what it does. It's more experimented in the biohacker and the performance athlete space. But I have met these guys. They went on Shark Tank. They've done a few things like that. I think the jury's still out. The main problem with those products, the liquids, is they taste like jet fuel, and the salts come with a very high sodium load. So it's not clear that eating your ketones pure is better than generating them yourself. But it's just not clear.
What do you think? You want to start wrapping it up?
You know what? I think, and Herbert says coconut oil, and coconut oil is a saturated fat plant-based oil. It's not magical, but it will in ketosis. I cooked with coconut oil. I made eggs with coconut oil. It tastes good. The myth about saturated fat is probably being debunked, consistently now as we speak in the absence of high carbs. So coconut oil may be okay, but it's not a magic thing. I think, guys, we are out.
Zubin Damani is a carb terrorist. He must be stopped.
I hate you so much, Tom Heineber.
Go, 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 go.
I'm alright.
Lab is so wild.
Uh-huh.
They look